He stood in front of the towering glass building, a storm brewing in his mind. Mark had just finished an intense meeting that felt like it lasted hours. He was exhausted, rubbing his temples, trying to shake off the tension. The day had started like any other, but somehow it had spiraled into chaos. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of something glinting on the polished floor. He bent down and picked up a keycard that must have slipped from someone else's pocket. It was an ordinary keycard for the high-rise building, nothing special. But in that moment it felt heavy in his hand, a small weight that carried all the unspoken worries of the day. With a sigh, he slipped it into his pocket. He stepped out of the building, heart already racing from what he had heard in that last meeting. People were talking, whispers swirling around the office about the project that had missed its deadline, about the budget that was slowly growing tight. If things didn't turn around quickly, someone might take the blame. Mark knew that in the world of business, heads rolled when the money spent didn't add up. As he walked down the block, the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the pavement. He speeded up his pace, glancing at his watch. He wanted to get home to the safety of his own four walls, but as he rounded the corner, he froze. Outside the building, a crowd of media reporters had gathered, microphones in hand, cameras flashing like tiny stars in the darkening sky. Mark's stomach dropped. This was bad, very bad. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought he could sneak away, let the day's stress melt away in the comfort of his home. But here they were, waiting for someone, possibly him. The last thing he wanted was to face the cameras, the buzzing questions. These questions echoed in his mind, creating a bone-deep anxiety. He took a couple of steps back, hoping to blend in with the crowd moving towards the restaurant on the other side of the street. But as he stood there, that keycard began to feel more significant. It was just a card, yet it symbolized something greater. Secrets, decisions that could change lives, and the crushing weight of responsibility. Mark could hear snippets of conversation from the reporters. His heart raced. He was a part of this story, whether he liked it or not. He thought of the hours he spent poring over plans, the late nights at the office. How if just one more person had stepped up, maybe things would have turned out differently. But here he was, trying to dodge the spotlight. Suddenly, a familiar face caught his eye. Ashley, his boss. She was making her way towards the media, her confidence radiating from her. She had been in this game long enough to know how to handle a crisis, how to be the calm in the storm. Mark admired her, but now he felt a tinge of envy. He wanted her strength, her ability to cut through the chaos like a knife. She called out, waving him over. It was a demand, not an invitation. Her voice had that tone, it left no room for argument. He hesitated, the instinct to retreat warring with the need to follow her lead. He took a deep breath and moved through the crowd, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he reached her, reporters turned their cameras on him. Mark. One shouted, pushing a microphone towards his face. The lights were blinding, and for a moment he felt like he might choke on the very air surrounding him. Another voice piped up. His heart raced, the expectation hanging in the air like a dense fog. He wanted to say everything was fine, to wave the flag of optimism, but deep down he knew that was far from the truth. Ashley stepped in front of him, her calm demeanor dissolving the tension around them. She kept her voice steady like she practiced, her gaze firm. Mark admired her strength but felt a twist of guilt for allowing her to shield him. He glanced back at the media, knowing they were hungry for more. Senses heightened, he realized they weren't there just to cover a story. This was personal for them. Careers were at stake, reputations could crumble, and behind the scenes, lives are affected by how this unfolded. Taking a step backward, Mark felt the weight of those unasked questions pressing down on him. He wanted to disappear, to shrink back into the shadows where the glare of the world couldn't reach him. The murmurs rose, a symphony of speculation filling the air. Mark thought about the people who depended on him, the team he had worked late nights with, the families that relied on the paychecks they earned together. The consequences were more than just corporate, they were very real, very human. Suddenly, Ashley turned to him, her expression shifting from one of confidence to a softer understanding. We need to address this together. He swallowed hard, her words piercing through the fog of his self-doubt. Together. That word hung heavy in the air, tethering him to the reality of their situation. He had to step up to confront the uncertainty head-on. With a nod, Mark took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of something inside him. Maybe he could face this after all. He wasn't alone. He had a team, even if it sometimes felt like a burden. It was also a source of strength. Mark turned to face the cameras, gathering the courage that was growing inside him. He felt like a soldier preparing for battle, ready to charge into the unknown. I want to say something, he announced, his voice echoing through the quiet spaces between questions. The buzzing paused for a moment as all eyes turned to him. The situation is complex, and we are working tirelessly to resolve the issues at hand. His words were simple, easy enough to understand, but there was a weight behind them. Mark focused on being honest. He didn't have all the answers, but he was determined to find them. Ashley placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a small gesture that meant the world to him. They were in this together, and for the first time that day, the storm inside him began to calm. The tension eased like a deep breath after holding it for too long. As the media continued to shoot questions, he felt like he was gaining momentum. With each word he spoke, he felt more grounded, more part of something larger than himself. The story had shifted from one of blame to one of hope and resilience. He brought the keycard out of his pocket, holding it up for the cameras. This, it may seem insignificant, but it represents access. Access to solutions, collaboration, and learning from our mistakes. The reporters paused, a slight shift in their energy, almost intrigued by what he had to say. Mark felt lighter, a spark of hope igniting. These weren't just cameras trained on him anymore. They were witnesses to a journey about to unfold, a story of struggle and triumph. He finished speaking and the energy shifted again, this time with respect. The next questions became less aggressive, more about solutions and recovery rather than blame. Mark realized he had taken the power back, not just for himself, but for his team. After what felt like an eternity, the swarm of reporters began to disperse, their questions replaced with murmurs of understanding. The spotlight faded and Mark could finally breathe. He turned to Ashley, a weight lifted off both their shoulders. "Thank you for pushing me," he admitted. The storm might still rage in the distance, but for now they stood together, facing what was to come. In that moment, Mark understood that the keycard he had found was never just a card. It was a symbol of something far more profound. It was about being part of a team, of standing together against challenges and finding light even in the darkest storms. And as he walked away from the building, a renewed sense of purpose filled his chest. With each step, he felt stronger, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The keycard would stay with him, a reminder of not just the mistakes of the past, but the promise of progress in the future. He barely registered the metallic glint of the keycard on the ground, his mind racing from the intensity of the meeting he had just escaped. Mark bent down, plucked it from the floor, and stood up, his heart still pounding with the weight of unspoken things that had just unfolded. Just as he slipped the card into his pocket, the heavy glass doors swung open in front of him. As he stepped outside into the bustling city, he immediately felt the tension thin the air. But that wasn't all he felt. There was a buzz in the atmosphere, urgent whispers brushing against his ears. Mark turned and his stomach dropped. A throng of journalists stood just a few feet away, cameras poised and an eager energy surrounding them like predators waiting to pounce on their next meal. This wasn't a mere coincidence. Nights of rain-soaked, desperate thinking had led to this moment. With a sudden flare of anxiety, he realized they were here for him. He had hoped to slip away unnoticed, but now he was the center of attention, like a moth caught in the brightest of lights. His palms felt clammy as he scanned the crowd. They all wanted to scoop the latest news, the latest fallout from the project that had fallen apart under his watch. He had just stood at the epicenter of that chaos back in the conference room, where voices clamored and accusations darted about like angry wasps. Failing project, they had said. Budget blows, they had murmured. All eyes had been on him, the lead project manager, the one holding all the pieces of a tattered puzzle that refused to come together. Taking small breaths, he tried to center himself. He was overthinking. These were just reporters after all, but as he looked into their determined faces, he thought of the stakes involved. Careers lived and died in moments just like this. What they wrote could ripple through the company like a shockwave. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. He wanted to turn back to retreat into the safety of the building behind him, but then again he could feel Ashley's voice echo in his mind. Face your challenges head on, Mark. Took a steadying breath, his resolve hardening, but before he could take a step forward, a woman in the front of the crowd called out, "Mark, tell us about the issues." Her voice cut through the air like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. He hesitated, the air thickening around him. Just seconds ago, he held that keycard. It felt mundane in that moment, but now it was like the weight of the world had transferred into his pocket. Was it a sign, something telling him that he had the key to all this? Another reporter shouted, jostling toward him. In an instant, Mark felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. This wasn't just about facts, this was about lives. Behind every number tossed around in the boardroom, there were people, his teammates, their families. They depended on him. He glanced to the side and saw Ashley emerging from the building. She was a fierce beacon of confidence, her presence commanding the scene with an ease he longed to match. He wanted her strength, the way she could face the worst head-on with a steady chin and unwavering gaze. She called out to him, breaking through the murmur of the crowd. Her intense eyes locked onto his, coaxing him toward her, urging him to shake off the fear. He moved toward her, every step feeling monumental, the attention of the reporters drilling into him. "You've got this," she whispered as he reached her side, and that brief encouragement lit something inside him. The moment hit a boiling point as the press rallied for answers. They were hungry, thirsty for blood. A man in a dark suit shouted, and Mark felt that tightening grip of anxiety. Another chimed in, and then it happened without thinking. Mark stepped forward, shaking off his reservations. "We are aware of the challenges we face," he said, drawing on his training, his voice firm yet calm. "Our team is working diligently to address the issues." His words hung in the air, uncertain but hopeful. He could feel Ashley nodding beside him, supporting him as they began to find a way through this storm. A woman pressed, her notepad poised ready for his answer. Mark took a breath, any semblance of control slipping from his grasp. The truth was messy, there were no immediate solutions on the table. But if he let them in on that, if he simply showed vulnerability, perhaps empathy could lead the way. The nature of this project is complex, he said slowly, letting the weight of his words sink in. We are analyzing where things went wrong, and yes, improvements will be made. There was a moment of silence, a small shift in the energy around him as the reporters absorbed his words. A glance passed between him and Ashley, a silent understanding. Perhaps there was power in honesty, a resemblance of strength in vulnerability. They weren't just figures on a spreadsheet, they were people bound together through trust. Mark steeled himself for the next question, aware that every word mattered. As more came his way, adrenaline surged through him. The questioning shifted away from blame and started to circle around solutions, potential paths for recovery. As he spoke, he felt his confidence solidify. The keycard in his pocket had transformed into a talisman of sorts, reminding him that even small things could have great significance. It was maliciously ironic. A piece of plastic had grounded him in a moment desperate to spin out of control. The conversation deepened, moving into discussions about what the company had learned from setbacks and how they would support their team moving forward. Mark realized this was a chance not just to save face, but to reset the narrative. He felt the tide turning not just in the eyes of the reporters, but within himself. A young reporter asked, her tone softer now, almost hopeful. Mark nodded. I can promise that we intend to learn and to grow from this. In that sharp moment, he felt the connection between truth and responsibility, learning and improving. It was raw and real, and he could almost feel the admiration in the atmosphere shift. Yes, it wasn't easy, and the road ahead remained arduous, but maybe this was exactly what the company needed, a wake-up call. As the press continued to ask questions, Mark felt lighter. With every answer, he built a bridge, not only to the reporters in front of him, but to the employees back at the office, the families who depended on them, and himself. Finally, as the questioning waned, a strange calm washed over him. The cameras weren't blinding him anymore, they were simply there, capturing a moment. He had spoken his truth. As the last of the media dispersed, Ashley smiled at him. You did well, she said, her voice rich with pride, and Mark felt a swell of gratitude. He turned to her, the adrenaline still humming in his veins. I didn't think I could handle that, he admitted, recalling that moment of panic when he first stepped outside. You did handle it, she replied softly. You faced the chaos instead of running from it. A sense of achievement filled him, fueled by courage and honesty that had emerged amidst the chaos. He glanced back to where the reporters had gathered and recalled that small keycard resting in his pocket. It represented clarity and transformation sometimes. Even small moments could open doors to unexpected revelations. And as they made their way back into the office, the weight of uncertainty began to lift, leaving behind the promise of hope and a sense of connection. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Mark now felt equipped to face it, armed with the power of his own voice. He stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing he had the key to unlock a better future, not just for himself, but for everyone counting on him. He reached down to pick up a keycard that had been carelessly dropped on the floor. The small plastic rectangle felt cool against his skin, but in that moment it might as well have been a weighty anchor pulling him down. Mark stood up slowly, feeling an unsettling mixture of confusion and dread wash over him. He glanced at the hallway behind him, still echoing with the aftermath of the meeting he'd just endured. The room had been charged, a storm brewing of tension and raised voices. His colleagues had pressed him hard, questioning decisions that had led to the project unraveling just weeks before its launch. They had demanded, eyes filled with accusation. Their frustration, palpable and intense, had been like arrows aimed at his chest. He could feel their disappointment, their anger clawing at him as he struggled to defend choices made under incomplete information. As he stood there, clutching the keycard tightly, the air around him shifted. He stepped toward the lobby where sunlight streamed in through colossal glass windows, illuminating the polished marble floor. The brightness felt jarring after the dark shadows of the conference room. For a moment, he thought he could breathe again. But then he walked through the glass doors and reality hit him like a punch to the gut. Waiting just outside was a collection of cameras and reporters, microphones ready and eager for sound bites. Mark's heart raced, a mixture of panic and frustration surging through him. He had hoped for anonymity, to slip away unnoticed. Instead, he was the center of attention, a spectacle for the media's hungry gaze. Mark, an eager voice called out, drawing the attention of every camera toward him. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. Mark felt a chill travel down his spine. How was he supposed to answer that? The truth was messy, full of miscalculations and unforeseen circumstances. Nothing about it felt neat or tidy, and he had little time to collect his thoughts. He hesitated, fingers tightening around that keycard in his pocket, a small token from the chaos. Each breath felt like a wave crashing over him, pulling him down. This wasn't just about him, it was about his team, about all those who depended on the success of the project. He could see their faces, their hopes tied to something that now seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Another reporter shouted, their voice cutting through the noise. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. The media was ravenous, ready to feast on whatever morsels of bad news they could get. Ashley appeared at his side, her presence a strong, comforting anchor. Stay calm. You've got this, she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She had been his mentor, guiding him through the convoluted maze of corporate life, but even her warmth couldn't fully quell the storm brewing in his chest. I need to speak, he muttered, surprising himself with the surge of courage that accompanied his words. Mark stepped forward, facing the throng of journalists, their cameras clicking like the rapid-fire sound of gunfire. He could feel Ashley's supportive gaze behind him, a reminder that he wasn't in this alone. The situation is complicated, Mark began, his voice louder than he expected. We faced unexpected challenges that impacted the project timeline. The murmurs quieted for a moment, confusion mixing with curiosity. He pressed on, fueled by the fear of failure and the desire to prove himself. We are a team, and every success and failure is shared among us. I refused to hide behind corporate jargon. A beat of silence followed as the reporters processed his words. There was something raw and genuine about his approach. A glimmer of respect began to reshape the atmosphere. Questions shifted from accusations to curiosity about solutions. A reporter asked, clearly intrigued by the new focus. Mark took a breath. We are conducting a thorough review of our processes, gathering feedback from all team members. Everyone's voice matters. This wasn't just corporate speak, it was a commitment to those he worked with and for. As the media pressed on with their questions, he found himself gaining traction. The initial panic began to ebb, replaced by a strange sense of empowerment. Every inquiry became an opportunity to clarify, to communicate. With each answer, he could see the reporters shifting, some taking notes, others nodding slightly as they processed his words. In that moment, he realized the power of vulnerability. Mark remembered reading about how openness fosters trust. He had often wanted to show strength by keeping his guard up, but the truth was, being transparent could draw people in. As the questions continued, he let go of his fears and embraced the responsibility he had felt slipping away. Another reporter pressed, and he felt the urgency of the question hanging in the air. That's not in our plans, Mark shot back, the determination rising in him. We believe in this project and in the people who have poured their heart and soul into it. As he spoke, he found himself thinking about his team, the late nights filled with brainstorming and the laughter shared during stressful moments. Each face flashed through his mind, reminding him of their shared dreams and aspirations. He wanted to keep that hope alive. A familiar voice broke through the chatter. It was Keith, one of his team members, trying to make his way through the media crowd. His face mirrored the same concern Mark felt. I knew you'd be out here. Mark met Keith's worried eyes and nodded firmly. Yeah, we'll be fine. That simple exchange felt grounding, a reminder that the people behind the scenes mattered even more than the spectacle out front. With that reassurance, Mark turned back to address the group again. We need to remember that projects aren't just progress reports. They have real people behind them, people who care. Each setback is a lesson. We said we'd take risks, and sometimes those risks come with pitfalls. His voice resonated with conviction now, fueled by the energy of the moment. The atmosphere crackled with the rawness of honesty, transforming the entire scene. He had sought to defend himself, but somewhere along the way, he had found his purpose, not as a solitary figure, but as part of a larger team determined to overcome. As he wrapped up his thoughts, he felt a swirl of support behind him. Ashley stood, arms crossed but beaming, and even the journalists seemed to be treating him with a newfound respect. These challenges don't define us, Mark concluded. What defines us is how we respond. As he stepped back, the final questions became subdued, filled with curiosity rather than antagonism. The media, drawn in by his willingness to face the truth, began clamoring not for blame but for hope. It was a small but significant shift. Once the crowd dispersed, Mark felt lighter, an invisible weight lifted from his chest. He turned to Ashley, who was already giving him a knowing smile. You did well, she said, pride shining in her eyes. Thanks, he replied, realizing how much he had needed her encouragement to find his footing. No one ever said it would be, she replied, her tone warm and reassuring. But you showed everyone you could step up in a tough moment. As they walked back inside, Mark pulled out the keycard he had picked up earlier, turning it over in his hands. In that moment of chaos, it had become a symbol of clarity, a reminder that in order to move forward, he had to confront the challenges head-on and emerge unscathed. The office felt different as he entered. It was quieter, but there was an air of possibility wafting through the space. It wasn't just the stark reality of a project in crisis. It was a community ready to band together, to learn from mistakes and to push ahead. Suddenly, the conversations swirling around felt productive, alive with energy. Mark's heart turned over, understanding that perhaps this was the moment they needed, a wake-up call for everyone. And as he settled back into his routine, he carried with him that small, innocuous keycard. Each time he glanced at it, he felt a surge of confidence and a connection to the moment he had faced the storm. He would keep it as a reminder that sometimes the smallest pieces can open the biggest doors. With each heartbeat, he recognized that they had challenges looming ahead, but he now felt prepared, emboldened by the power of vulnerability and the undeniable strength of his team standing firmly by his side. Together, they would turn this story around, crafting a narrative of resilience and hope that would echo through the halls of the company long after today. The future felt bright, and Mark knew he would face whatever came next with courage. He bent down to pick up the keycard, its smooth surface reflecting the fluorescent light from above. Mark didn't think much of it at first, just a typical office keycard. He slipped it into his pocket, distracted by the chaos of the day. But the moment he stepped outside, everything changed. The air felt electric, heavy with unspoken tension. As he walked through the glass doors of the sprawling corporate building, a vision of freedom loomed just ahead. Finally, he would escape the suffocating atmosphere of the meeting room, where voices had clashed like thunder, questions had flown like arrows, and ambiguity swirled like a storm in his mind. He had been exposed, unprepared for the reality of how quickly everything could unravel. But as he stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, he stopped short. His heart sank, a knot twisted in his stomach. There they were, media cameras, reporters, all waiting just for him. The eager faces, the clicking of cameras, the outstretched microphones, they were like a pack of wolves, hungry for a story, ready to devour any piece of news they could find. Mark, a voice cut through the noise, urgent and demanding. The reporters were shouting, vying for his attention. Just moments ago, he had longed for a breath of fresh air to escape the turmoil. Now he felt trapped in a spotlight he wasn't ready for. Panic surged through him, a torrent of thoughts colliding in his mind. How did it come to this? Just hours before, he had sat in the comforting confines of the conference room, trying to project confidence while his colleagues pressed him for answers. The project was faltering, and every question swirled around him like a tsunami, rising higher and higher. A reporter shouted, the words echoing off the concrete walls. Each question was a wound, stripped of subtlety, piercing him directly. Mark felt exposed, raw. How could he even begin to explain? He glanced at the keycard in his pocket, a mundane piece of plastic that now seemed to carry the weight of the world. It was just a keycard, but in that moment it felt more like a token from a world that didn't care about the struggles behind the scenes. This was about lives, the people who worked with him every day, his team. Ashley, his boss, stepped out behind him. He could feel her presence calming the storm brewing inside him. She had always believed in facing challenges head-on, and he admired her strength. "Stay calm, Mark, we can do this," she murmured, her voice low but filled with determination. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling Ashley's support radiating from her. "I need to speak," he said, surprising even himself with the confidence that had bubbled up. He faced the sea of cameras, steadying his gaze, heart racing. "The project has faced significant challenges, yes," he started, feeling the power of truth in his own words. "But this isn't the end." That was it, the magic word. The crowd perked up, their expressions slightly shifting. Came another voice, the urgency palpable. "Many factors contributed to the setbacks, and it's crucial to understand that this is a shared responsibility. Our team is in this together," he said, emphasizing unity. Each question that followed felt less like an attack and more like an opportunity. The chaos began to settle like dust in the wind, and Mark found himself gaining momentum. He thought of his team's late nights, their laughter, the sweat equity they poured into this project. They were his driving force. "We're analyzing every aspect of our process. To improve, we must learn. Mistakes are a part of growth," he declared, his voice growing louder, threading through the chaos around him. "Our focus now is on finding solutions, not on the blame game." As he spoke, he felt the tension easing in the air. The reporters were nodding, shifting from raw curiosity to deeper interest. Mark understood that they were human too. They needed stories that went beyond mere headlines, something real. He felt a connection forming, an understanding that brought their worlds closer together, if only for a moment. A more friendly voice chimed in, a shift in tone that reflected the newfound respect. Mark took a breath, recalling a time when he had read about vulnerability in leadership, a concept he'd always found daunting yet fascinating. "Our plan includes direct involvement from every team member. Everyone will have a voice in how we navigate our recovery." The buzz around him shifted, a palpable air of curiosity combined with respect. There was no longer just a single target in their sights. He had turned this into a dialogue. Questions became a conversation, a community effort rather than an interrogation. One reporter stepped forward cautiously, as if testing the waters. Mark felt the weight of that question. "That's a great point," he nodded. "Morale is essential. We must support each other through the rough patches." Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his pocket, drawing his attention. He slipped it out and saw a text from Keith, one of his closest colleagues. "We're with you." A wave of support washed over him, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. Pride tinged the corners of his anxiety as he glanced back at the crowd. Every setback presents an opportunity for a comeback. As he finished speaking, a new energy thrummed through him. The reporters nodded, their body language shifting from aggressive to intrigued. This was different. He was different. Mark realized he was no longer just trying to survive. He was trying to thrive in the moment. And then the questions, rather than pounding him relentlessly, began to lean into hope. Another reporter asked, sincerity in her voice. Understanding what went wrong is our first step. We're conducting a full review, exploring every aspect of our decision-making process, he replied confidently. We will also open up channels for our team to share feedback. As more questions came, he felt the ground beneath him solidify. The panic that had once gripped him slipped away, replaced by an undeniable clarity. He was not just answering questions, he was crafting a message, setting the tone that his team would rally behind. After what felt both like an eternity and a heartbeat, the media began to wrap up. Their questions turned lighter, tinged with curiosity instead of accusations. One journalist called out. Mark smiled, genuinely this time. As soon as we have actionable steps, I promise transparency. With that, the crowd began to disperse. The tension in the air transformed into a buzz of anticipation, not just for the story, but for what might come next. He could feel the shift, the energy around him pulsed with possibility. Ashley stood beside him, arms crossed, but a smile breaking through her initial serious demeanor. You did brilliantly, Mark, she said, pride shining in her eyes. He was at a loss for words, still buzzing from the adrenaline. That's all it takes sometimes. You face the storm head-on and you emerged stronger, she responded, her approval warming him from the inside out. As they walked back into the building, Mark realized that everything had changed. The media frenzy would vanish, but he had gained something far more valuable: clarity, courage, and connection. Each step felt lighter. Mark pulled the keycard from his pocket and looked at it thoughtfully. It was just a card, but now it felt like more. It represented not just access to a building, but access to ideas, communication, and collaboration. It was a symbol of lessons learned, a reminder of the chaotic moments that had led him here, confronting challenges, learning to lead, and embracing vulnerability. They re-entered the office, and the atmosphere was charged with a new spirit. His colleagues had gathered, faces painted with concern but filled with hope. Mark felt it ripple through the room. There was an unspoken understanding hovering in the air. They were in this together. He spoke directly to them, his voice steady and clear. Today was rough, but we're going to turn this around. We're going to engage, communicate, and refocus. Each face brightened at his words, a flicker of fire igniting in their eyes. The room buzzed with energy as people gathered to discuss solutions, to brainstorm and strategize how they would move forward. Mark felt a swell of camaraderie, a shared determination weaving them into a cohesive unit. And as he watched them collaborate and push through the remnants of frustration, he felt something shift within himself. The keycard had transformed from an ordinary object to a catalyst for inspiration. It could unlock not just doors, but the potential for an entire team. With every discussion that unfolded, Mark knew that they would rise above this. More than that, they would become resilient, learning from today's turmoil. He understood that while the storm may linger, each step forward would be filled with purpose and hope. In that moment, he made a silent promise to himself and his team. They would face every challenge together, unwavering, ready to emerge from the chaos stronger than ever before. And as Mark stood among them, he realized that together they held the key to a brighter future. He bent down, his fingers brushing the cold, smooth surface of the keycard that lay forgotten on the hallway floor. Mark didn't think anything of it at first, just another abandoned item cluttering the world around him. But as he stood up and slipped it into his pocket, an uneasy feeling bloomed in his chest. He stepped through the glass doors of the corporate building and into the bright afternoon sun, hoping the warm light would wash away the pressures of the day. But instead of freedom, he was met with chaos. Outside, a crowd of reporters clutched their microphones, eager faces illuminated by the glare of camera lights. The air was thick with anticipation, and Mark's heart dropped. They were waiting for him. His stomach twisted as he realized the weight of their gaze. He had just come from a volatile meeting that felt more like a courtroom trial than a strategy session, and now he was the focal point of a media frenzy. Mark, a voice cut through the noise. The rest of the reporters turned and cameras swiveled to capture the moment. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to retreat, to melt into the crowd, to hide from the questions that were sure to come. But he stood rooted to the spot, caught in a moment that felt both surreal and terrifying. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, the adrenaline racing through his veins. Just hours before, he had faced his colleagues, their critical eyes narrowing on him as they hurled questions like bullets. They had demanded. The stakes had never felt higher. This was not just a business failure, it was a potential collapse that could cost jobs, livelihoods, and reputations. As memories of the chaotic meeting flooded back, the reporters pressed on. Another voice shouted, trying to cut through the murmurs. Mark's heart raced. How could he articulate what had happened? How could he explain the pressures they faced, the tight deadlines, and the tangled web of expectations that had pushed the project to its limits? He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. Just then, Ashley stepped outside, her presence cutting through the noise like a lighthouse beam through fog. She had always exuded confidence, a steadfast leader even in the face of adversity. "You've got this, Mark," she whispered, as if she could sense the torrent of doubt that raged within him. Her words were a lifeline, anchoring him just enough to take a deep breath. He turned to face the swarm, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend. Would he stand tall, or would he crumble under the pressure? He clutched the keycard in his pocket, an unassuming object that suddenly felt monumental. It represented access, yes, but it also symbolized the fragility of their situation. Taking a step forward, he raised a hand, commanding the attention of the crowd. "The project has faced significant challenges," he began, feeling the tremor in his voice but pushing through. He felt the tension shift, the reporters leaning in, some scribbling notes, others raising eyebrows as they soaked in his words. A cacophony of questions erupted, and he tried to navigate through them. One reporter pressed, their curiosity laced with skepticism. Mark took a breath, steadying himself. There were multiple factors, unexpected technical difficulties, resource allocation issues, you name it. His conviction rose as he spoke, a flicker of determination igniting within him. Another voice called out, sharp and piercing. "We take accountability very seriously," he replied, finding his strength. "But this isn't just a matter of pointing fingers, it's about learning and growing from our experiences." With each response, a strange energy enveloped him. A sense of purpose began to replace the fear. Mark realized that this wasn't just a media circus, it was an opportunity to share his truth, to illustrate the challenges they faced as a company and as a community. The reporters had come seeking scandal, but what they would get might just be something much deeper. A reporter narrowed their eyes, seeking a headline. "Right now our focus is on solutions and supporting our team, not on layoffs. Everyone's role is essential to the recovery process," he asserted, feeling the weight of his words settle into the crowd. As he spoke, the atmosphere transformed, the reporters shifting from pursuing him for the sensational to genuinely engaging with what he was saying. Their questions changed tone, curiosity piercing through the initial hostility. A voice called, not out of malice, but from a genuine desire to understand. Mark felt invigorated. "First step, we will conduct a thorough review of our processes and invite feedback from every team member." He could see nods of approval from some reporters, their expressions softening. A reporter asked, the tone now more hopeful. "Yes," he replied, grounding his voice with firm conviction. "Absolutely. We're committed to this project and to ensuring its success." With each passing moment, he began to feel the surge of camaraderie, not just with his team, but even with the media. They were humans too, doing their jobs, wanting a story that mattered. He thought of the countless hours spent alongside his colleagues, the laughter shared during tight deadlines, the late nights fueled by energy drinks and determination. A familiar face emerged from the crowd. "Keith," one of his team members, rushing forward. "We're right behind you." The words flooded him with renewed confidence. He thought of the stakes, the people who relied on their success, the families that were intertwined in the struggle. Above all, this was more than a job, it was a mission that brought them all together. A reporter asked, leaning forward with intent. "Very much so," he replied, sincerity heavyweight in his voice. "We will ensure regular updates and follow through on the steps we are taking." As the questioning continued, he felt his earlier fears dissipate into the air around him. The confidence began to weave through him, lifting him up like a sudden gust of wind. Each question felt like a puzzle piece that he was now ready to assemble, transforming anxiety into purpose. Finally, the reporters seemed satisfied, their questions shifting toward solutions rather than blame, a subtle acknowledgement that they had witnessed something genuine. With every answer he gave, he felt the barriers breaking down. Mark was no longer standing on shaky ground, he was solidifying his footing step by step. "Mark," a reporter shouted as he wrapped up. "Leadership isn't about perfection, it's about resilience," he replied, the words spilling out with strength. As the air around him buzzed with anticipation, Mark took a step back, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. The press appeared to leave with a newfound respect, the cameras rewinding from sensational to insightful. Ashley stepped forward, a proud smile gracing her face. "You did amazing," she said, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "I wasn't sure if I could handle it," he admitted, meeting her gaze. "But you did," she affirmed. "Today was a pivotal moment for you and for the whole team." As they walked back into the building, he couldn't help but reflect. The earlier chaos had transformed into an opportunity for growth, both personally and professionally. It wasn't just about surviving the day, it was about thriving in the face of uncertainty. The atmosphere inside the building felt different as they entered. The heaviness that once lurked now seemed to lift, each person energized with renewed hope. Conversations bubbled around them and the energy was palpable. Mark explored the building with a new spirit. He remembered that keycard resting in his pocket, which had once symbolized the chaos he had faced. It now felt like a key to potential and new beginnings. "Let's gather the team and discuss our next steps," he suggested to Ashley, and she nodded enthusiastically. In the coming days, Mark took the initiative. The team gathered, their spirits ignited as conversations flowed freely. Ideas blossomed, challenges were openly discussed, and solutions began to take shape. The keycard no longer symbolized a lock, but rather a doorway, an entrance into a future that was waiting to be created. Weeks later, the media returned, not to tear them down, but to celebrate the strides they had made. Recognition came in different forms, a successful project launch, positive feedback from the team, and even the community that rallied around them. They had turned the narrative into one of resilience and unity. And every time Mark pulled that keycard from his pocket, he was reminded that sometimes picking up the small things can lead to monumental change. The struggles had honed their resolve, but it was how they faced those struggles together that defined their journey. As he walked through the office, the buzz of teamwork surrounded him, and he felt something deep within, a sense of purpose, a bond with his team, and an unwavering commitment to collectively forge ahead, energized by their shared triumphs. In the end, it was not just about a keycard or even the media frenzy. It was about a journey that transformed them individually and as a community, guiding them towards something greater. Each of them held a key to a unified future, ready to unlock the doors of possibilities that lay ahead. He bent down, fingertips grazing the cool, smooth surface of the keycard that lay on the polished floor. The moment felt nearly trivial, yet as he pocketed it, a sense of foreboding twisted in his stomach. Mark stood up, shook off the unease, and strolled toward the glass doors of the building, ready to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the conference room. But as he stepped outside, the world shifted dramatically. He was met by a frenzy of bright camera lights and eager reporters, their voices clashing like a chorus of alarm bells. The crowd was waiting, their eyes bearing down on him, hungry for the next big story. Mark's heart sank. This wasn't how he had envisioned his exit from yet another long day at work. "Mark," a voice rose above the clutter, urgent and demanding. The moment his name escaped the reporter's lips, every camera found him. He felt the energy of the throng pulsating, the pressure mounting. Just hours before, he had defended himself in that boardroom where every word had felt weighty. Now here he stood, the center of attention. His anxiety tightened its grip. How could he face them? How could he explain the turmoil of that day? He felt vulnerable, exposing himself to a world desperate for answers in a situation that felt anything but simple. A reporter called out, their microphone thrust forward as if it was an extension of their own urgency. Questions rained down on him like bullets, each one sounding more accusatory than the last. Mark gritted his teeth, nervous energy coursing through him. He was still processing the fallout from that disastrous meeting, where his colleagues had erupted into a chorus of frustration. They had demanded, their voices echoing in his mind. Their anger had felt like a storm, swirling and consuming everyone in its path. But now, standing here, the storm returned, and he was confronted not only by his peers, but by the media. It was Ashley, his boss, who pulled him out of his momentary daze. "Remember what we talked about," she said, stepping beside him. Her presence was steady, a beacon in the chaos. Mark nodded, inhaling deeply. The warmth of her support brought a flicker of strength. It was a quiet declaration, but he felt a fire ignite within him as he stepped forward. "The project has faced significant challenges," he said, his voice trembling slightly but steady enough. That small act, the decision to speak, felt monumental, like pulling a string that could unravel the entire tapestry of doubt and uncertainty woven around him. A reporter pressed, clearly eager for details, the crowd murmuring with anticipation. Mark glanced at the jostling crowd, feeling a twinge of adrenaline. There were several factors that contributed to the delay: miscommunications, unforeseen complications. As the questions continued, the initial wave of panic began to recede, replaced by a sense of determination. Each inquiry felt less like an attack and more like a chance to clarify the situation. He felt the undercurrent of unity within his voice, an acknowledgement of the teammates who were all invested in this endeavor. Another reporter shouted, pressing in for a more sensational angle. "No one solely," Mark replied, a calm determination settling in his bones. As he spoke, he could almost feel the energy shift around him, the interest morphing from hostile to something more nuanced, a quest for understanding rather than for blame. The voice cut through, sharp and biting. Mark felt a chill in the air. "Right now," he started carefully, "our primary focus is ensuring stability for our team." He saw nods from some reporters, a flicker of respect swimming behind their curiosity. Called out another journalist, voice filled with expectation. Mark took a breath, thinking back on the countless discussions he had shared with his team over late nights and endless cups of coffee. "We'll begin with a structured review, gathering feedback from every team member." With each word, Mark felt the tension ebbing away. The door that had felt shut was opening, revealing a pathway toward recovery. He was no longer just defending, he was leading. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, he began to see the humanity in this tumultuous interaction. Then he heard a familiar voice cutting through the crowd. "Mark," it was Keith, one of his team members, pushing his way to the front, determination etched on his face. That show of support flooded Mark with warmth, a reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. The urgency of the questions turned from pointed accusations to genuine engagement. One reporter asked, an interest lacing the edges of her voice. Mark felt a powerful sense of resolve. "Trust comes with communication and shared responsibility," a voice shouted again. Tomorrow felt distant in this moment, but he held the weight of expectation in his hands. "We will update you on our progress weekly." With every answer he provided, Mark felt the earlier pressure morphing into something that resembled clarity. He was no longer just reacting to the media's onslaught, he was actively shaping the narrative. Each response carved a pathway toward a better understanding of their collective challenges. As the questions dwindled, the crowd began to shift, and he could see a change in their demeanor, less appetitive for scandal, more curious about solutions. It was like they had witnessed not just a person in distress, but a leader emerging from the shadows of uncertainty. He sensed a shift in energy, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared humanity. Mark was reminded of the late nights spent strategizing, brainstorming solutions to the chaos that plagued them. These were not just co-workers, they were people invested in a mission they all believed in. Mark paused for a moment, letting that question anchor him. My vision is for us to come together and embrace these challenges. We need to learn from this, strengthen our approach to planning. Another voice chimed in. There will be no hiding in the shadows, he replied resolutely. The crowd began to disperse, their questions turning softer, tinged with a new respect. He felt Ashley's reassuring hand on his shoulder, a reminder of solidarity. You handled that beautifully, she said softly. Mark took a deep breath, still riding the adrenaline rush. But you did, and that's what matters, Ashley responded, her approval a balm to his earlier insecurity. As he walked back into the corporate building, he felt lighter. The chaotic energy that had once threatened to crush him transformed into a shared understanding, an acknowledgement that they were all in this storm together. The flurry of cameras trailing him felt less constraining now. He had managed to turn the tide and forge a new path. Mark reached into his pocket, pulling out that keycard he had picked up earlier. It felt different now. Once a mere object, it transformed into a symbol of possibility and potential, a key to unlocking conversations, trust, and solutions. As they settled back into the quieter confines of the office, he addressed his team, their faces lit with a newfound energy. Everyone, Mark began, commanding attention with a steady voice. We faced a storm today, but we emerged stronger. The road ahead won't be easy, but we will find our way. There was an electricity in the air as discussions ignited. Ideas flowed freely, laughter mixed with sincerity. Conversations shifted from blame to solutions, and hope began to weave through the room like a warm current. Over the next few days, Mark spearheaded a commitment to open communication, inviting every team member to share their thoughts, their concerns. Together, they brainstormed ways to reinforce their team's foundation, recognizing that the strength of their project rested not just on individual talents, but on the unity that bound them together. Every time Mark glanced at that keycard resting on his desk, he was reminded of their journey, of the challenges, the fears, and the triumphs that came from resilience. It served as a guiding light, a reminder that even amidst chaos, clarity could be found. Weeks later, the media returned, not to report a failure, but to highlight a turnaround story that resonated with the community. Mark stood before them once more, not as a figure of scrutiny, but as a beacon of hope and determination. He recalled how far they had come. Their project launched successfully, drawing in accolades and renewed partnerships. The tone had shifted, reflecting the collaborative energy that flowed through the team. Families depended on their success, and Mark could feel the realization of those lives and dreams resting on every decision they made. As the applause echoed through the office, he caught a glimpse of Ashley, standing proudly at the back, a satisfied smile stretching across her face. She had been right. Facing the storm had allowed them to grow stronger. With each step forward, Mark felt grateful for everything that had challenged him, preparing him to lead with purpose and integrity. He understood now that the key to success wasn't found in evading the storm, but in trusting each other to weather it together. Each moment became a building block, a community forged in adversity, ready to unlock the doors to their future. And as he looked around at the faces of his team, he knew they were more than coworkers, they were a family. Together they held the keys to boundless possibilities, and the horizon shone bright with hope. He picked up the keycard, its glossy surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Mark held it for a moment, feeling its weight in his palm, a simple piece of plastic that held unexpected significance. Just moments earlier, he had been deep in a high-stakes meeting, the pressure mounting with each word fired across the conference table. Now an unsettling feeling crept in as his mind raced with what lay ahead. As he stepped outside the sleek glass doors of the building, the bright sunlight momentarily blinded him. The air was crisp, yet charged with an overwhelming anxiety that sat heavy in his chest. He'd hoped for a brief moment of escape from the tension of the meeting. But instead, he was met with chaos. A throng of reporters loomed just out of reach, cameras flashing like stars in a dark sky. Voices called out to him, urgent and demanding. Mark, he froze. The moment crystallized around him, the realization sinking in like a stone. They were here for him. The weight of their expectation pressed down hard. Just hours ago, he had been battling accusations, defensive and scrambling for words to shield his decisions. Now in this unexpected spotlight, he felt exposed. How could he articulate the sheer complexity of what was happening at work? A reporter shouted. He sensed his heart racing, panic creeping in. The meeting had been a whirlwind of voices and fury. Accusations of mismanagement had been hurled like knives. Mark had felt the shame move through him, and now here he was in front of the very people who thrived on public spectacle. Another voice called, sharp and insistent, drowning out the rest. That question shot through him like ice through his veins. The panic from earlier clawed its way back to the surface. If only they knew the stakes in the world he hovered within. Someone's career, someone's future was on the line. He could see their faces flashing through his mind: Keith, Ashley, Sarah, all those who relied on him, all counting on him to put forth some kind of faith in their future. Ashley stepped through the door, her confidence radiating like a fortress wall surrounding him. "Just breathe, Mark," she whispered, her presence steadying him. Taking a deep breath, he felt a flicker of resolve ignite within him. Clutching the keycard tighter in his pocket, he stepped forward. The pressure built, an undeniable urge to reclaim the narrative. "I'll take questions," he announced, raising his voice above the clamor. The reporters leaned in, cameras trained on him like predatory birds, eager for a glimpse of weakness. "The project did face significant challenges," he began, forcing the words out, his throat tight. A chorus of murmurs swept through the crowd, reporters exchanging glances as if weighing the implications of his words. Mark could feel their eagerness shifting from one of aggression to curiosity. Someone yelled, the crowd urging for clarity. He could almost feel Ashley's gaze urging him to keep going. "There were technical setbacks that affected our timeline. I want to be completely open about this." The air was thick with tension, but Mark pressed on. He found a rhythm in his voice, a confidence that emerged in answering their questions honestly. "This is teamwork, it's not just about one person." Another voice piped up, its skepticism palpable. Mark felt his stomach churn. "I can assure you that our focus is on finding solutions, not on laying blame or dismissing team members." As the questions continued, he felt the tide shifting. The tone had changed. They were no longer circling like vultures. There was a spark of respect reflecting in their eyes. While the scrutiny persisted, Mark sensed a small camaraderie forming. He had begun to connect with them, not just as media, but as people seeking meaning in the chaos. A journalist asked, leaning forward as if eager to catch his every word. "We are conducting a full review of what went wrong," he replied, a sense of purpose firming up within him. "We will gather feedback from our team, and from there we'll implement changes." For a brief moment, the murmurs faded into a thoughtful silence. Mark could see some faces scribbling notes, their tone shifting from hostility to genuine interest. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see the bigger picture. "Mark," someone shouted from the back. That was a question he felt ready to tackle. He thought of all the late nights spent alongside his colleagues, the brainstorming sessions filled with laughter and determination. "We're focusing on communication and transparency." As he spoke, he felt stronger. Each answer built upon the last, and gradually the focus began to shift away from blame and toward recovery and rebuilding. The crowd began to reflect understanding, their questions becoming less about sensationalism and more about hope. A voice called out, the eagerness evident. "Yes, right now our primary focus is to stabilize the team and address these issues together. We are committed to ensuring everyone retains their roles," he affirmed, a sense of relief washing over him as he answered. As the questions ebbed and flowed, he felt invigorated. The initial panic slowly transformed into empowerment. For the first time that day, he wasn't just standing there as a target. Mark was taking control of the narrative, steering it toward a future that felt promising. Finally, a young journalist spoke up. Mark let the question settle in the air. "I promise we'll keep you informed." The tension that once lingered in the air began to lift as the reporters took a step back, their expressions shifting to something far more respectful. The questions turned softer, imbued with a sense of understanding. Mark could see that they were willing to listen, and he had finally regained his footing. Just then he heard Keith's voice in the crowd, raising a fist. The camaraderie that surged through the team felt like a wave, crashing into him, lifting him higher. "Mark," a voice interjected. Mark felt empowered. The crowd seemed satisfied, their tension easing into respectful interest. A wave of relief washed over him. As the media turned to pack up their equipment, Ashley stood beside him, a proud grin on her face. "You did it," she said, genuine admiration shining in her eyes. "I didn't think I could handle that," Mark admitted, still buzzing from the interaction. "But you did. You faced the storm, Mark. That's not easy to do," Ashley affirmed, and her pride resonated within him. As they made their way back into the building, Mark felt lighter. He had navigated the chaos not just for himself, but for his team. The memory of that earlier moment, the panic, the uncertainty began to fade. His fingers brushed against the keycard in his pocket, and it now symbolized more than just access. It represented resilience, vulnerability, and growth. It reminded him that sometimes within chaos, new opportunities could emerge. Weeks later, the building buzzed with energy as the team gathered to celebrate small victories on the road to recovery. They had worked tirelessly, their collaboration turning into a source of inspiration. Mark stood in the back, surveying the room filled with laughter and enthusiasm, and he felt a swell of pride. The media had returned, but their focus had shifted. They were now looking for signs of progress, not blame. A story of redemption unfolding before them, and Mark was ready to show them the result of their hard work. In a conference room filled with the team, Mark addressed everyone. "I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible effort we've all put forward." The applause that followed echoed in his heart, one that tied them all together. They had faced challenges, but together they had built something stronger. Mark saw the faces of his colleagues light up with respect, with understanding, and through every step of their journey they had transformed pain into promise. As he looked around the room, he understood that they were more than coworkers. They were a family. They had embraced the chaos, turned it into a narrative of resilience, and emerged stronger. With a final glance at the keycard on the table, a small but significant object, Mark knew they had unlocked the doors to a future filled with possibility. Together they had faced the storm and found a way to thrive, proving that even the smallest decisions could lead to monumental change. And in that moment, as laughter and camaraderie filled the air, he could feel the promise of tomorrow waiting just beyond the horizon. Together they would continue to unlock every door they faced, turning uncertainty into opportunity, and knowing that they could weather any storm. He knelt down, fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the keycard that had been carelessly discarded on the polished floor. Mark picked it up, momentarily mesmerized by its simplicity, a flat rectangle that could unlock doors and grant access. Little did he know, this small act would set off a chain of events that would change everything. As he stood, the cacophony of the busy office faded behind him. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped outside into a world that felt brighter, almost blinding after the fluorescent lights of the conference room. Mark took a deep breath, his mind still swirling with the chaos of the earlier meeting. He had just faced a storm of accusations from his colleagues, each one like a thunderclap, rattling his conviction. But as the doors closed behind him, an unsettling wave of anxiety crashed over him. Before he even turned the corner, he felt the shift in the atmosphere. A quiet hum enveloped the space, a collective energy thrumming in the air. He looked up and froze when he saw them, reporters, cameras, lights glaring. It was a media frenzy, waiting for someone to slip up, and today that someone was him. Heart racing, Mark's stomach turned. He'd hoped to escape the suffocating atmosphere within the office, but instead, he had entered a battlefield of flashing lights and eager faces. They were here for him, and he suddenly felt exposed, like a deer caught in the headlights. "Mark," a voice shouted, piercing through the noise like a knife. He felt his throat tighten, every muscle in his body wanting to retreat back into the safety of the building. The meeting had left him rattled, but this was a different kind of fear. How could he explain the chaos of the day? Words twisted in his mind and doubt crept in. A reporter pressed, eyes glinting with curiosity and desperation, a reporter's dream of scandal. Mark swallowed hard, trying to remember his training, trying to summon the calm Ashley had always spoken of. He took a step closer, the keycard in his pocket feeling heavier than it should. For a moment he hesitated, caught between the urge to run and the need to stand tall. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the wall of cameras, stepping into the light. "I can answer a few questions," he announced, proud of the strength that edged into his voice. A hum of excitement swept through the media, their eager faces turning toward him like flowers following the sun. "The project has faced significant challenges," Mark started, feeling the tension in the air shift slightly as he spoke. "But that doesn't mean we're backing down." The barrage of questions continued. Someone shouted from the back of the pack. The tension spiked once more, the pressure of the moment crashing down like waves. "We are analyzing where we went wrong." He could see nods of acknowledgement among the crowd, a flicker of respect shining in the reporter's eyes. Another voice pressed, urgent and demanding. A knot formed in Mark's stomach at that question. The stakes felt impossibly high. Lives depended on this, and he didn't want to be the one to bear bad news. "Right now, our focus is on the project and supporting each other." In that moment, he remembered the faces of his team members, Keith, Sarah, and others who had poured their hearts into this project. He thought of the late nights spent poring over spreadsheets, brainstorming ideas, sharing laughs, and even those moments of frustration. They were in this together. A reporter called out, a flicker of hope in their voice. Mark felt a surge of confidence. Communication and transparency will be essential as we move forward. The reporters seemed to lean in, intrigued. Suddenly, it felt less like an interrogation and more like a conversation. Maybe this was an opportunity to show them the human side of what was happening behind the scenes, to turn their focus from blame to understanding. As he spoke, the pace of the questioning changed. They were no longer seeking a scandal, but rather looking for solutions. With each response, Mark felt the chains of vulnerability breaking apart. He was no longer afraid, he was starting to own the narrative. Another voice shouted, cutting through the buzzing excitement in the air. That question hung in the air like a thick fog, and for a second he felt lost. As he stood before the reporters, he grasped the keycard still tucked in his pocket. It was just a piece of plastic, but right now it felt like a lifeline. He took another breath, steadying himself. "The project fails, we will regroup, we will learn. This is a setback, not an end." The energy shifted again, and Mark noticed that the crowd seemed to be turning from skeptics to supporters, hanging on his every word. With all the questions and answers flowing, it was as if he was leading them into a new narrative, a story not about failure, but about resilience, learning, and the strength of teamwork. A voice asked, softer now. "Absolutely," he replied, the determination hardening in his heart. "We'll have regular updates." Just then he heard Keith calling out from the group. The support surged like a wave, lifting him higher. The atmosphere buzzed with a sense of camaraderie, and Mark began to realize that this was more than just a media appearance, it was a turning point. The fear he'd felt earlier transformed into something more, a sense of purpose that ignited his spirit. He was no longer just defending himself, he was leading a conversation, and that felt powerful. As the questions waned and the reporters began to step back, Mark felt a rush of relief mixed with exhilaration. He had done it. He had stood before a crowd that had threatened to judge him and emerged with a message of hope. Ashley stepped up beside him, her eyes filled with pride. "You handled that so well," she said with a warm smile. "That was intense," he replied, still in a whirlwind of adrenaline, "but you faced it," she stated firmly. As they turned to head back into the building, Mark felt lighter. The oppressive weight of expectation had transformed into a sense of accomplishment. It was a new beginning, a chance to redefine what success meant in the face of adversity. But just as they reached the door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a text that sent chills down his spine. It was from Keith. "We need to talk." Mark's mind raced, the earlier confidence faltering. What could that possibly mean? As he and Ashley stepped inside, he felt the walls close in, the once celebratory atmosphere shifting to a tight tension. Ashley asked, sensing the change in him. "I don't know," he admitted, brows furrowing with worry. "I just got a strange message from Keith." As they approached his office, Mark's heart began to race again. Could be waiting for him, the media frenzy, the project's challenges, they were already so overwhelming. What could be worse? The tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step feeling heavier. He could hear the murmurs of his team behind the closed door. Was it discussions of defeat or hope? He turned the handle to his office slowly, then pushed the door open. The chatter fell silent. All eyes turned to him, filled with uncertainty and something else, fear. "Mark," Keith began, his voice grave, "we need to talk about the numbers." Mark felt the blood drain from his face, a chill spreading through him. What could possibly go wrong now? Just as he had taken the first step toward overcoming the storm, another one loomed on the horizon, ready to crash down around him. He asked, his heart racing anew. "The budget reports they're showing discrepancies we can't ignore." The words hit him hard. All the hope he had felt moments ago seemed to evaporate like mist. He looked around the room at his team, their faces clouded with doubt. Suddenly, it felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. Just when he thought they had found their footing, the universe had pulled the rug out from under them again. Mark's mind raced, thoughts colliding like a freight train. Could this be a mistake? Was it just a misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The keycard he had pocketed now felt like a mocking reminder of his vulnerability. It was a key to access a world that was beginning to slip away from him. And just as he had thought he was ready to lead them to victory, now despair loomed closer. "Look, we need to gather the numbers and act fast," Mark said, feeling the weight of leadership crash down heavier than before. "If there's something wrong, we can't afford to wait." As the team nodded, Mark felt their collective determination. Yet beneath that determination was fear, and he knew they all felt it. Time was ticking, and with each passing moment, the storm they had begun to calm seemed to rear its ugly head once more. And as the reality of the situation settled in, Mark realized he was caught in a cycle of uncertainty, forced to step back out into the chaos he had just left, ready to confront whatever came next. The echoes of the reporters were still fresh in his mind, their questions ringing as clear as day. But now, what awaited him was far more complicated than he ever anticipated.